This evening's reading is from Mark chapter 12, starting at verse 13 through to verse 17. That's Mark chapter 12. Later they sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus to catch him in his words. They came to him and said, "Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right to pay the poll tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we?" But Jesus knew their hypocrisy. "Why are you trying to trap me?" he asked. "Bring me a denarius and let me look at it." They brought the coin, and he asked them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. Then Jesus said to them, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar, and to God what is God's." And they were amazed at him.
Well, good evening. It's good to see you. Do keep that passage open with me in Mark chapter 12. As we begin tonight, I want to ask you a question. It's a question that might feel a little bit uncomfortable. It's a question about paying taxes. Now, I know at first that doesn't sound very spiritual, but just hang with me for a moment, because it's a question that's not just about numbers appearing and then disappearing on a paycheck. Ultimately, it's about a collision of two kingdoms. It's about what it means to live faithfully as God's people in this world, in a world that often doesn't acknowledge him. And here's the question I want to ask you. In light of a culture around us sliding further and further away from its biblical heritage, its historical Christian heritage, in light of that culture increasingly becoming hostile to the things of God, and in light of a world where we often see leaders and governments that are unjust, corrupt, maybe even outright wicked, is there a moment when any Christian in any nation can rise up and say, "Enough. You know what? You're so evil. You're so bent towards wickedness that we are now no longer going to give our money and taxes to fuel that. We are done with PAYE." Now, it's a question that many believers throughout the years have wrestled with. And increasingly, it's probably going to become a question as there's this hostility seemingly growing in our nation towards Christianity that might become a more pressing question for believers. Should we pay taxes to wicked leaders? Now, at the core of such a question is this conflict of the kingdom of God and the kingdom of men. And I want you to notice at the heart of that question is in many ways the heart of our passage. So as we think about such a question of, is it always right for God's people to pay taxes to wicked nations, we need to hear what Jesus has to say to us. And as we look at these verses 13 through to 17, I want you to notice Jesus isn't just talking about money. He's talking about kingdom economics. He's talking about how we live as his people, his disciples, in a world that often opposes him. So what does it look like for you and I as Christians to live as citizens of this nation, but also knowing that our ultimate citizenship is in heaven? Well, as we seek to answer that, we're going to see what Jesus has to say. And as we look at this text, after the sheer craziness last week of a Baptist minister having no sermon points, let's bring some order back to the chaos. 3 sermon points, all kind of alliterated. The trap set, the trap exposed, the true allegiance shown, and the Baptists breathed again. So firstly, verses 13 and 14, the trap set. As we have been walking through Mark's gospel over the last year or so now, one thing has become crystal clear. From the very beginning, the religious establishment has been trying to trap and mock and turn the people away from Jesus. Early as chapter 2, you saw the religious leaders begin to scoff at Jesus' ministry because the kind of people he hangs around with. sinners, tax collectors, those who were considered unworthy of being recipients of their rabbi's care. The religious leaders could not understand that the Messiah would come to the broken, to the marginalized, to the outcasts. So from the very beginning, Jesus' ministry is under a level of scrutiny. You enter into chapter 3, it begins to intensify. They now begin to watch him healing on a Sabbath. How dare he, they think. Doesn't he know our traditions, the laws of our elders? Doesn't he know what is proper around here? Their eyes are on him. They're looking for him to do something wrong. They want to accuse him, to trap him, to miscredit him. And as we walk through Mark's gospel again and again, the pattern becomes unmistakable. So much so, by the time you come to chapter 7, there's this question that seems trivial about hand washing according to the tradition of the elders. But to the religious leaders, it's never trivial. To them, it's an opportunity to trap, to highlight Jesus' disobedience to their religious laws. So then you enter into chapter 10, you get a question about divorce. A question that ultimately the religious leaders are trying to trap Jesus into saying something along the same lines that John the Baptist said. So what happened to John the Baptist might happen to him. Do you see it throughout Mark's gospel? Every encounter the religious leaders have with Jesus becomes more calculated, more venomous, more designed to corner him, to trap him, to destroy him. All the way through Mark's gospel we see this. And then as we come to this final week of Jesus' life, things begin to intensify. Because back in chapter 11, Christ came into the city of Jerusalem as the king. And where does he go? Chapter 11 tells us he goes straight to the temple, to his father's house. There, what does he find? He does not find prayer. He does not find worship. He does not find devotion. He finds financial corruption. The very leaders who were supposed to be shepherding the people of God had turned the house of God, the place where heaven and earth intersected, into a marketplace. And Jesus in the Gospels does not mince his words. He accuses them of turning the house of prayer for all nations into a den of robbers. And from that very moment, things begin to shift in the religious leaders' heads. So much so, by chapter 11, verse 18, the religious leaders are now not simply trying to mock Jesus or to trap him. They want to ultimately destroy him. They want to kill him. Chapter 11, verse 18. The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him because the whole crowd was amazed at his teachings. So from that moment, their hearts are hardened. Their minds are set, and now in Mark's gospel, the cross looms larger and larger. And we saw it last week, didn't we? Jesus in that parable of the tenants. And do you remember how the parable ended? The tenants standing for the religious leaders murder the beloved son. Jesus had been hinting at it all the way along, but now the tension is breaking out into the open. And the religious leaders know it. Verse 12 of chapter 12. Then the chief priests and the teachers of the law looked for a way to arrest him because they knew he had spoken the parable against them. But they were afraid of the crowd, so they left him and went away. The religious establishment shrink back. They're afraid of the people. They regather, they plot and they scheme. And then sometime later they come up with a trap. One that they think they can finally catch Jesus in his words. So we pick it up in verse 13. Later they sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus to catch him in his words. They came to him and said, "Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with truth." Notice with me, even before they lay the trap, we know their goal. The goal is to trap Jesus. And notice with me how they, in that sense, try to bait the trap. They put a little extra honey on there, as it were. They try to flatter Jesus with their words, as if Jesus is going to be swayed by their thinking. And notice the complete irony in verses 13 and 14. These religious men were not men of integrity, but Jesus was. They were swayed by what others thought, but Jesus wasn't. He taught the way of God in accordance with truth. They taught tradition, which sometimes even opposed truth. They bait the trap, they set it, and they lay it before the feet of Christ, thinking they've got him. Game, set, match. For here comes the trap. Verse 14. Is it right to pay the poll tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we? Now, when you think about that question, at face value, it might be a sincere question, a reasonable one, even maybe a curious one. But we know already the dark intentions of these religious men. Chapter 11, verse 18 has told us they are plotting now for a way to get rid of Jesus. This week they come with this question to trap him. Next week they will come with a question or a scenario to mock him. It's designed to ensnare, to expose. And so here are the Pharisees and the Herodians coming with a question that seems simple. Is it right to pay the poll tax or not? But I want you to notice something interesting. I want you to notice in the passage who is asking the question, because verse 13 tells us it is being asked by the Pharisees and the Herodians. Now that might not mean anything to us today, but I want you to notice there was a vast difference between these two groups of people. The Pharisees were the religious purists. They were legalists. They were separatists. They detested Rome. They saw the Roman taxation as a heretical burden, a direct affront to the very commands of God. And on the other side, you have the Herodians. They were compromisers, politically invested in Herod's dynasty. They were loyal to Rome. They were supportive of Roman taxations because it preserved their position and it maintained their political peace. These two groups were normally enemies. Yet these enemies come together because the only thing that can unite enemies is a bitter hatred for the one they want to remove. So they come together. Verse 13, Pharisees and Herodians, two antagonistic groups, part together, and they come with a trap set. Is it right to pay the poll tax to Caesar or not? Now, in the first century world, that question was explosive. And here's why, because as we know, the Jews were living under Roman occupation. This tax, it may be in your footnote, it directs you to the fact that this was a tax that was not put upon Roman citizens, but on those who had been taken over by Rome. And as Romans often did, they taxed the people in heavy ways. It was enforced by the tax collectors. And the Romans would often tax anything they could. And while some of the things that they taxed, that money was used for good things, for roads, for mail systems, for military, for water, maybe even for the peace of Pax Romana, we also know that same money was used for things that were far from good. Money of that would go into the pockets of the Caesars. It was used for blasphemous things like the construction of temples to false gods. And so the people of Israel who had been subject by Rome felt crushed, weighed down, oppressed by the poll tax. And so this was the issue of the day. And this is the political backdrop to the question being asked. And here's the trap. If Jesus says yes, the Pharisees will turn to the crowd and they will accuse him of siding with the oppressors. They will say, look, we told you he can't be the Messiah. He's helping Caesar, the tyrant. He's no friend to God's people. But if Jesus says no, don't pay the tax, the Herodians will go off immediately to the authorities and they will accuse him of a rebellion. We told you this man is dangerous. He's an enemy to the state. Stop him before he incites a revolt. Do you see? Either way, he's trapped. On one side, he will appear as a traitor to Israel. On the other side, he will appear as a rebel to Rome. Either way, they think they've won. Game, set, match. And to make the trap even more cunning, the cultural expectation was a rabbi would always answer questions posed to them. To remain quiet would make that rabbi look evasive, weak, or guilty. So to them, the trap is set, and it's a perfect trap. But as the passage goes on, I want you to see that Jesus, in his wisdom, in his discernment, in the rest of this passage, he will reorientate the conversation, and he will teach the people of something far greater than the question itself. So firstly, in verse 13 and 14, we see the trap set, and now in 15 and 16, we see the trap exposed. As they throw out their question to Jesus, is it right to pay the poll tax or not? You can imagine them now sitting back thinking, whatever he does, we've got him. If he says yes, we can accuse him of siding with our oppressors. If he says no, we'll treat him as a rebel to Rome. There's no way out. But notice how Jesus responds, verse 15. But Jesus knew their hypocrisy. Why are you trying to trap me? Bring me a denarius and look at it. They brought him the coin, and he asked them, whose image is this? And whose inscription? Caesar's, they replied. Now notice with me, a denarius was the standard silver coin that was circulated across the Roman Empire. It was about worth a day's wage of the common laborer. On one side of the coin was the image of Caesar, his very face stamped into the silver. On the other side of the coin, it had the inscription, Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. That is, there's an image stamped with the face of Caesar. The other side of the coin says, this man is God. And feel the tension. The Jews hated carrying that coin because it wasn't just to them a daily reminder of their oppression. For every time they pulled out that coin, every time they got it from their pocket or their wallet to pay a tax, to buy bread, to pay a toll, it preached to them. It said, you are under the thumb of Rome. But not only did it speak of their subjugation, it spoke words of blasphemy. And why? Well, think of the second commandment. You shall not make for yourself a graven image. And so every Jewish man and woman would have known that command. Yet in their very pockets was a coin stamped with the image of a man who claimed to be God. They had a graven image in their pockets that they were forced to carry. So think about it. Every time they got out that coin, they were carrying the idolatry of Rome in their pocket. They carried the very arrogance of Caesar in their hand. It was a daily reminder to them that your lives are not your own. And they hated it. They hated the coin. They hated the tax system. They hated everything it represents. So when the religious leaders walk up to Jesus and ask, is it right to pay the poll tax or not? Do you see how much of a bombshell of a question it is in the first century world? For here are the religious leaders coming to Rabbi Jesus, holding up a coin, as it were, asking him to speak into their oppression, to speak into the blasphemy that's happening. And how does Jesus respond? Well, he doesn't stumble. He doesn't dodge. He doesn't get caught in their trap. Instead, he gives them one of the most history-shaping statements ever to come from his lips. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and to God's what is God's. So lastly, verse 17, the true allegiance shown. What must have been going through the minds of the religious leaders' heads? They thought they had Jesus. They were confident in thinking whatever he did, it would play into their trap. Yes or no, he's going to be a rebel to the nation or a rebel to Rome. Silence would look disastrous in the eyes of the people. Attempting to evade the question could backfire. Answering it directly would mark him off either one of two ways. And yet Jesus here, the master teacher, with a single sentence, dismantles the trap and reveals to us and his people then a twofold allegiance that we all should carry. For here Christ's words speak to us of a temporary allegiance and an eternal allegiance. So let's just think about those quickly, both quickly. First of all, notice that Christ's words here speak of an earthly allegiance. That when Jesus says, render to Caesar that which is Caesar's, he's not just dropping some or throwaway political statement. He's not just dodging their question. He's laying down one of the most influential statements ever written. Not just politically, but practically. These very words shaped how the reformers in their day showed the distinction between the authority of the church and the authority of the state. It was used in America to divide the two in its time as well. And notice with me these words from Jesus in verse 17, render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God's what is God's, are written into a context that was far from ideal. Because let's be honest, Rome was not a model of justice. Rome was not a beacon of liberty for everyone. Rome, for many, was corrupt, oppressive, violent. It was ruled by a man who thought he was literally the son of a god. And yet, in Jesus' words, notice that he is not diminishing the state, is he? Jesus doesn't say forget taxes, forget governments, forget the whole political system. In fact, Jesus assumes their viability and validity, doesn't he? Render to Caesar what is Caesar's. And why? Because even a broken government, even a flawed and a messy government is better than no government at all. And the words he uses are significant. The word render in the Greek means to give back what is owed. This is Jesus saying, if Caesar minted the coin, if his image is stamped and impressed on the coin, then the coin belongs to him. So give it back to him. That's his point. That's the ethic. Followers of Jesus don't live above society. They faithfully live in society. And what that means is that he doesn't just say, pay your taxes, does he? He could have. That would be surface level. He goes deeper. Here is Christ setting up a principle for his people, that to render to Caesar what is Caesar's means that as his people we are to operate ethically, faithfully, lawfully in the land that we live in, even if that nation at times might feel broken. It's not to retreat, it's not to hide, it's not to think your holiness means you can flee from your responsibility. No, Jesus is teaching us here to live as citizens of this world. That is what the Apostle Paul will write about in Romans chapter 13. There is no authority except that which God has established. And so even flawed earthly authority, imperfect as it might be, biblically we know is under the hands of a sovereign God. Now, of course, this does not mean there are moments when obedience to God trumps obedience to men. We know biblically, don't we, when the state demands something that God forbids, like, for example, in Acts chapter 4, when the apostles are told to no longer preach about Jesus, then the line from the people of God must be, we must obey God rather than men. Or when you are asked to compromise your integrity or to act immorally, a Christian is never free to sin in the name of obedience to the state. But Jesus' point here is not about the expectations to the norm, but the norm. That the normal posture of a Christian life is to be one of living faithfully as a lawful abiding citizen. That we give to Caesar's what is Caesar's. We pay our taxes, we honor authority, we seek the good of the city. Because remember the Lord, the God of heaven, what did he tell his very people when they were in exile in Babylon? Pray for the flourishing of the city, because if the city flourishes, you flourish. He said that in Babylon of all places. So don't withdraw, don't live indifferent, seek the good of the community you're in. Which means for us as believers, it is good and it is right for us to pray for Hertfordshire, to pray for our education system, to pray for our local councillors, our MP, to pray for the people of Tring. Not because we're chasing worldly influence or power, but because we want our town to flourish under God's common grace, because when Tring flourishes, we in turn flourish. So Jesus says, render to Caesar what is Caesar's. Not grudgingly, not fearfully, but faithfully. But even as we do that, even as we live as responsible citizens of this world, we must not lose sight of something else. Because Jesus here doesn't just say, render to Caesar what is Caesar's, but he goes on. So follow the text, verse 17. Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Picture the moment. Jesus here is standing in front of a crowd of people. The religious leaders of the day have come to him, asking a question. Should we pay the poll tax or not? And Jesus responds by saying, someone give me a coin. You can imagine him taking that coin and looking at it. The sun bouncing off the silver. The face of Tiberius Caesar pressed into the metal. And he asked them the most basic question in the world, whose image is imprinted upon the coin. And it's an easy one. Caesar. So he gives them the coin, will give back to Caesar what is Caesar's. But don't miss what he's doing. He's not just dodging their trap with some cleverly worded wordplay. But there's another question behind it, isn't there? That if Caesar's image is stamped on a coin, and we are called to give back to God what is God's, then whose image is imprinted on us? And we already know the answer, don't we? Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. So it's this, Caesar has minted his image on a coin, but the living God of heaven has minted his image on you. So if you have to give back the coin to Caesar because the coin belongs to Caesar, you belong to God. So what does it mean for you to give back to God what is due to God's? What does it mean to render to God what is God's? Well, now we're not just talking about taxes. We're not just talking about scraping our leftover time together. No, we give him what no government can demand. We give God what he fully deserves. Our worship, our praise, our love, our devotion, our loyalty, our very lives. And as we saw this morning, this is never to be in a half-hearted way, but with full, total, reverent surrender to the God of heaven. So Jesus' words cut both ways. Yes, on one hand, a Christian has an earthly allegiance. We give to Caesar's what is Caesar's. We live under governments. We operate within society faithfully. We pay our bills. We walk in integrity in our workplaces. It is good and it is right. But on the other hand, Jesus says you have an eternal allegiance, one that swallows up every other allegiance. So Jesus says, give to God what is God's. And what is God's? What belongs to him? Everything. Every breath, every heartbeat, every decision. And that is the tension of the Christian life. We live as citizens of this world, but our ultimate citizenship is in heaven. So we live responsibly in the here and now, but we have our eyes fixed on that which is to come. We walk through this world, but our hearts are anchored in the one that is to come. That's what makes Jesus' words so powerful here. He doesn't just simply give us a rule to follow, but a framework in which we now live. He says, be wise in the world. Be faithful in the world. Don't live in the world like the world owns you, but show your ultimate allegiance is to me. So let me put the question to you. Where is your heart? Are you living as though Caesar in your life owns you? Or do we live as if God owns us? And how is our daily choices showing that to be true? In our lives, are we shaped by eternal priorities or by temporary conveniences? Notice here, Jesus, in one brilliant sentence, dismantles their trap. The Pharisees thought they had him boxed in, no safe way out, no answers. Either he will be a traitor to the nation or he's going to be a rebel to Rome. But in just one verse, in one sentence, Jesus exposes the wisdom of God and reveals the heart of the kingdom of God, as he lays before his people a twofold vision of a temporary earthly allegiance as we give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and a far greater eternal one as we give to God what is God's. So that's the cool Christian. Everything we have, everything we are, has not been stamped by Caesar's image, but by God's. And so we belong to him. He has a rightful claim on our lives. And my prayer for us is that we would be a people who live here and now faithfully as citizens of this world. That we would live in a way where we honor the authorities. We honor those that the Lord has placed above us in our nation, in our lives. We seek the good of our towns and our communities. We live responsibly and ethically in our world, in the ordinary runs of life. But as we do so, we have our eyes fixed on our eternal home with Christ. And so, sons and daughters of the Father on high, we are called to live in such a tension. Faithful in the world, but we're not consumed by it. Obedient to earthly authorities, yet surrendered to the heavenly King. So we pay our taxes. We work hard. We keep laws. We love our neighbors. And underneath it all, we are always praying, your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.